Welcome everybody to this planning meeting on the 7th of February. My name's Phil Murphy. I'm the chair of the planning committee. Just check. Oh, Dale, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Chair. My name's Councillor Dale Rook and I'm the Vice Chair of the Planning Committee.
Officers, Craig?
Craig O'Connor, Head of Planning in Monmouthshire County Council.
Philip Thomas, Development Services Manager with Monmouthshire County Council.
Joanne Chase, Solicitor to the Planning Committee.
Paige Mosley, Solicitor.
Richard Williams, Democratic Services.
Amy Longford, Development Management Area Manager.
Mark Davis, Highway Development Manager, Monmouthshire County Council.
Andrew Jones, Development Management Area Manager.
Thanks for that. Can you remember, please, if you wish to put your hand up, use the chat rather than the hands up function. And can those online remember that they must keep their camera on at all times, otherwise you won't be able to vote. The order for today is apologies. So, Richard, have we got apologies, please?
Yes, Chair. Apologies from Councillors Bryn and McConnell.
Any declarations of interest?
My apologies, sorry, it was for yesterday, not today. I'm here today.
Yeah, we could see it was for yesterday, but we weren't quite sure, so we thought we'd give you apologies anyway, just in case. No declarations of interest, no. Can we go to the accuracy of the minutes of the previous meeting? Can I have a proposer for the accuracy, or anybody want to raise any points? Ben? Okay, and Maureen, thank you. We'll move on then to the planning applications, and the first one we're going to look at is DM 2019/01300. It's the erection of a replacement detached dwelling, provision of a new access road, an amended domestic curtilage to the existing dwelling house, and all associated external works on Woodman Court on the site of the former 8A Highfield Close off Highfield Road and Highfield Close in Osbaston, Monmouth. Andrew, you're going to present this one.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members and other members of the public joining us this afternoon. So just to confirm from the outset, this application is presented to Planning Committee this afternoon as the threshold of objections, which is 5 households, has been exceeded. I'd also just say, for the sake of clarity with this application, which was originally submitted in 2019. This originally sought permission for 6 dwellings, which would have been a net gain of 5 units. The proposal now before us today is for a replacement dwelling only. And just by way of background, the original dwelling at 8A Highfield Close has previously been given permission for a replacement dwelling in 2018, and I'll go through those plans in the presentation. And to note that this dwelling has been demolished, and so the permission is now considered extant. The current application, as the Chair has said, would relocate the siting of the dwelling, and the new access route would pass through the footprint of the approved replacement dwelling. So we'll just go through the slides now. So you can see on screen the application site edged in red, which links to Highfield Close, and then obviously there's, might be difficult to see, but there's some aerial imagery there of the application site and its wider surroundings and context. So just moving to the next slide. So as I stated, permission was granted in 2018 to replace 8A Highfield Close. So this is that approved scheme. You can see there apologies, the image is a little small, but that's the position. So over the previous footprint, a 2-storey unit was agreed. So the demolition was undertaken, but obviously that dwelling was never erected. We've got the elevations of that, which was approved on the next slide. So that's useful just to clarify by way of background and planning history. So moving to the next slide. So this is the current proposed site plan. So this takes the access through what was once known as 8A Highfield Close. That takes through what's currently a section of hedge there would need to be removed, and that takes the driveway through there in a northerly direction through, and would effectively be repositioning the new dwelling to the north in, hopefully you can see the cursor that Phil's showing on screen. So turning to the next slide. These are the floor plans of the proposed, it's 2-storey dwelling with an integral garage. It's sort of, I say, a sort of linear staggered form. So these are the floor plans. And then this is the south and east elevations. And similarly, those are the north and west elevations of the proposed replacement dwelling. Turning to the next slide. This shows the sort of indicative landscaping layout. You can see the attenuation measures, including a pond in the southerly part of the site, leading then through up to the north. And finally, the next slide. It shows the sustainable drainage plan. Apologies, you probably can't make out too much of the detail on that, but I'll go through drainage matters in turn. You've got some photographs there as well. So this, it would be the access to the site through 8A Highfield Close, and that's just the view then if you're heading in a sort of a westerly direction from Highfield Close. And as you can see, those photographs there are annotated, so that shows looking southeast across the field, and then from the existing boundary, looking north towards Woodmancote on the right-hand side. Right, okay, so in terms of officers' evaluation assessment, just firstly, as ever, in terms of principle, the site is located within the development boundary for Monmouth. It's defined by policy S1 of the LDP, where new build residential is permitted, subject to detailed considerations, but it's obviously worth noting that this is a replacement dwelling. As I said earlier, there is no net gain of dwellings in this instance. The site itself is not located within either C1 or C2 flood zones, although it is located within the River Wye SAC catchment area, and I'll discuss this point later. However, as stated, a replacement dwelling has previously been granted permission, and officers remain of the view that the provision of a replacement dwelling is acceptable in principle. So turning to some of the more detailed material planning considerations. In terms of, firstly, visual impact, as members that were able to join us on site yesterday will have noted, there's a variety of house types and styles within the surrounding built environment. And so the proposed replacement dwelling adopts a simple, contemporary approach. And as you've seen on the slides, it is essentially comprised of two parallel staggered elements that orientate from east to west. The main part being a flat-roofed 2-storey element, and then with a slightly smaller pitched roof element on the south that accommodates some of the ancillary elements, including the garage that I mentioned earlier. So the site itself slopes down from east to west and north to west, and the proposed dwelling, as you can see, hopefully you can see on those lines there, would be cut into the site. The height of the roof to ridge on the main wing on the east elevation is 5.8 metres, although the new ground level would take this below the existing level, given that element of cut. Officers are satisfied that the proposed form and design, which takes on, say, quite a contemporary and simple approach, and the use of natural materials, coupled with the levels of the site, result in a development that is considered to be of high quality and that would comply with the relevant planning policies, including policy DES1 of the current adopted LDP. In terms of some wider issues and landscape issues, officers certainly accept that the site is open to views from the rural landscape to the west, over which there are open panoramic views from within the site, as say members that would have joined us will have seen yesterday. And whilst the development would require the loss of 8 trees, all of which would be moderate to lower quality category C trees, this would be compensated for by the provision of 29 new species. All category A and B trees would be retained. And as I noted earlier in terms of the access, whilst the loss of a section of hedgerow is necessitated to provide the new access route, new stretches of native indigenous hedgerow are proposed along the north, west and eastern boundaries. And therefore, whilst the character of the site itself would inevitably change from one that is currently rough pasture land to the siting of a dwelling, officers are of the view that the compensatory planting and design and orientation of the new build would not have a harmful impact on either the immediate built environment or indeed the wider landscape setting. In terms of highways and access and highway safety, this application, as well as the application on the adjoining site known as Woodmancote, have been subject to extensive consultation with the Council's highways engineers, who also attended the site visit yesterday. It's important to highlight that 8A Highfield Close was purchased by the applicant to facilitate access to this site. It's proposed that the new single access would serve both this replacement dwelling and the replacement dwelling proposed on the adjacent site known as Woodmancote. And this shared access is proposed to run parallel to the rear boundary of numbers 4, 6 and 8 Highfield Close. The existing vehicle access serving the adjacent site at Woodmancote would be closed, making it pedestrian only. I'll pick up that matter in more detail as that's covered through that application and within that site boundary. So just to clarify further to yesterday's site visit, the applicant's agent has confirmed that the red line boundary of the application is correct. And using the Council's online measuring tool, the distance from the red edge of the boundary to the shared driveway would be approximately 2.5 metres. The proposed shared drive measures 5.8 metres in width as it crosses through what was once a Highfield Close, and once within the site running north, it reduces down to 4.8 metres and then down to 4.1 metres once it gets to the rear of number 6. Local residents have expressed strong concerns that the proposal, in addition to the adjacent site, would lead to a dangerous increase in traffic using Highfield Close, and there is also concern that the highway, Highfield Close, is too narrow to serve existing traffic levels. Concerns have also been raised with the position of new planting in proximity to the eastern boundary. However, it is worth noting that proposed condition 3 requires detailed soft landscaping plans to be agreed via planning condition, and therefore final positioning, species, etc. could be considered via the discharge of conditions process that could also involve full consultation with neighbouring parties. Highfield Close itself, though, provides access to 13 dwellings. It's approximately 4 metres wide, 4 metres for clarity, and benefits from footways on both sides. The Council's highway engineer is satisfied that the level of trips associated with a replacement dwelling at 8A, as well as those that would be served by the replacement dwelling at the other application at Woodmancote, are of an acceptable level. The new access route is considered to be designed of an appropriate standard to serve a shared private drive. Subject to the imposition of appropriate planning conditions, including a construction traffic management plan, the development, having regard to the advice of our highways engineers, is considered to be acceptable and accords with the requirements of policy MV1 of the adopted LDP. In terms of residential and neighbour amenity impact, the replacement dwelling is orientated, as I noted earlier, east to west, and therefore the narrower gable ends of the dwelling would face towards the rear of the properties along Highfield Close. So having regard to this, the levels which are to be lowered, and the significant intervening distances, the proposed replacement is not considered to have either an unacceptable overlooking or overbearing impact on neighbouring dwellings. There is third-party concern with the route of the new shared driveway and the possibility of noise and disturbance caused by associated vehicular movements. And whilst third parties have requested greater separation distance between the new driveway and the rear gardens of the properties along Highfield Close, officers are of the view that the layout as submitted and as on screen is acceptable. It's reasonable to consider that the level of traffic movements resulting from the two dwellings, that includes Woodmancote, need to be considered together. But as stated, given the separation distance and buffers proposed, officers consider that the proposal provides appropriate levels of mitigation that prevents this from having an unacceptable impact on the neighbouring properties. In terms of drainage, firstly, in respect to foul drainage, as I stated earlier, the site is within the River Wye SAC catchment area, and accordingly, the application has been screened to determine whether there are likely to have significant effects on the SAC. But having regard to NRW's advice on such matters, this would not see any result in net increase of dwellings, and therefore it's not considered to be an increase in wastewater, and therefore the matter has been screened out under the Habitat Regulations process. In terms of surface water drainage, the proposed development will require separate consent to be submitted to and approved by MCC as the SAD's approving body, and to confirm a SAB application has been submitted, and the relevant officer offers no objection to this planning application. During the course of the application process, the proposed landscaping scheme has been amended to align with the sustainable drainage strategy. The scheme includes a swale along the eastern boundary, as well as a new attenuation area to the south of the site. And whilst finer details of the said proposal would fall to be determined under the SAB process, given the advice from the SAB officer, it's considered there is sufficient information to inform the planning decision in terms of surface water. So in conclusion, as members will see, this application was first submitted in 2019. It's been subject to very detailed consideration by officers as well as our statutory consultees. And having regard to relevant planning policies as well as all other material planning consideration, the development is considered acceptable, subject to the planning conditions within the committee report, and is therefore presented to you this afternoon with a recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. And I have a letter here from the local member, Jane Lucas, who has work commitments and is unable to be here today. The letter actually covers both applications, Woodmancote and the current application that we're looking at. So I'll just read it the once. Members have seen it in late correspondence, but for the benefit of others in the room and those looking online, I'll read it out. So Woodmancote Highfield Close planning application. I apologise for not being able to talk to you all in person today due to my work commitments. However, I would be grateful if you would consider my thoughts below. I have visited the site of these two different applications many times, and I'm very concerned that it does not offer any mitigation towards the residents of Highfield Close, when it could easily do without losing from the proposed building. Highfield Close Road is very narrow, and vehicles must park half on the pavement to allow other traffic to move freely up or down the road. It seems unfair to both residents of the Highfield Close and the applicant to not allow the demolition and rebuild of Woodmancote. However, the entrance into Highfield has been there since the resident was built, and I suggest it should still be in the same location and access point as it is now. The oak trees on the boundary appear to have fungal brackets growing, indicating decay and perhaps a hollowing of stems. Could this be checked further, please, by a qualified arborist? I do have photos to back this up. If they need to be removed subject to TPO or conservation area status, then it would be possible to improve the visibility. Perhaps both proposed dwellings on the Woodman Coat site could access from Highfield Road. The applicant could gift enough land to build a pavement to improve the safety of pedestrians and improve visibility display for the access serving both and possible future dwellings. I've spent time talking to all the residents, both on the Close and Highfield Road. The concern seems to be the future building. Whilst I understand you must only consider what is put in front of you, please look at the bigger picture. If you would permit me to be so bold to ask if it's within your gift, at the very least ask for houses to be built at least 4 metres from the boundary hedges of Highfield Close houses. Consider the new build to reflect the original curtilage on Highfield Close of that residence already demolished. Thank you for taking time to read this letter. And Councillor Lucas has actually reminded us all there that we are looking at the applications in front of us, not the potential for further applications that might come in on the rest of the site. We cannot consider that today. We've got no speakers from the Town Council, but we do have Aled Roberts here attended on behalf of the residents. And Aled, I believe you want to address us. You've got 4 minutes, and you've elected to come to the lectern, haven't you?
Thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of the residents of Highfield Close and put forward our objections to these applications. Unfortunately,
Alec, could you just lift the mic a bit, please? Thank you.
Unfortunately, we weren't notified about this coming to committee, so there's a number of residents who weren't able to make it today, but I've been elected to put forward the thoughts. Throughout the 3-year process, there have been numerous legitimate concerns raised, but in all that time, there's been no attempt to recognise these or adapt their proposals. There's been no engagement or consultation, and the applicants simply don't care. For the general residents of Highfield Close, the key issue is the principle of access, which we feel is wrong, as the Close is a narrow, substandard road which 2 cars can't pass on. I know you've been directed to only consider the 2 houses that are currently shown, but this is incredibly misleading as it is part of a much larger scheme, and the applicants obviously wanted to develop their wider field. The actual scheme is for 7 houses off the proposed access. All 7 have been fully designed, but due to phosphates restrictions, 5 of them have been temporarily switched off. They're still shown on their site plans, and their planning consultant has clearly stated that this is a temporary situation. The other elephant in the room is that the applicants have deliberately squeezed the development into the top half of the field, obviously so they can develop the bottom half once they have these in the bag and have access. There's reference to 5 being allowed off a private drive, but they will simply get the main section adopted, which takes away any restriction. So the true impact is going to be even greater. It's development by stealth and makes it easier for these developers to hide the true impact, fudge the issue of affordable housing and commuter sums. And surely the whole point of planning is to consider the wider implications. The development will fundamentally change the character of our close and have a negative impact for all of us. You can see the extent of objections over the years, which have been completely ignored. In fact, they've gone the other way, with Woodmancott being added to the proposed access, even though it has an established connection directly onto Highfield Road. As the owner of number 8, I obviously completely agree with these concerns, but me and my immediate neighbours also have other issues too, as we are more impacted by these insensitive proposals. The proposed road scrapes our boundaries and will almost turn us into an island. The position of the houses, including the ones temporarily switched off for the purpose of this application, and road will cause us major loss of amenity. They are squeezing every inch of developable land out of the site and have incorrectly shown their boundary as halfway through our privet hedge and our neighbours' boundaries, when it's actually the field fence on the other side, regardless of what they've since clarified. They've shown some trees being planted literally on this boundary as a gesture to screening, and these are heavily relied upon in terms of the landscape officer's justification. However, it's not possible to actually plant them on this boundary without trespassing on our land, and it'll be impossible to maintain as half will be overhanging our properties. I think the point about dealing with these as a future condition discharge avoids the whole point that there isn't physical space to plant them, and it will, regardless of that, it's going to be an impossibility. For years, we have asked for the proposals to be pushed back 3, 4, 5 metres to give a proper landscape buffer and retain the existing trees and vegetation along this boundary. Surely this is a reasonable compromise and should have been easy to do if they cared.
You've got 45 seconds left now.
They're saying it's not possible due to levels, but that is misleading. The true reason is that it involves hassle, but it'd be a better, more sympathetic arrangement and give some fairness to the people most affected by the development. We think the replacement dwelling for Woodmancote should be redesigned to keep it accessed off Highfield Road. The applicants want to have a sweeping drive to Highfield Close purely for the value and prestige of their house, but this is unnecessary and compounds our issues as residents. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this. Throughout the process, our issues have been ignored and there's been a lack of transparency and honesty. Unfortunately, I know that residents' views aren't always given as much weight in reality, but we're putting our faith in you as a committee to give us some fairness in this proposal.
Thank you very much, Aled. We have the agent now, John Rhys-Davies. Thank you, John. Andrew, Mark, do you want to comment on that after the agent's spoken? Or do you... Yeah.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Rhys-Davies from LRM Planning, and I'm here today talking on behalf of the applicants. The applicants grew up at Woodmancote, and the vision for this site is for the land to be sensitively developed. It's not commercially driven, despite offers from developers. The applicants have done things by the book. They've engaged in 2 pre-application meetings, and they've endured lengthy negotiations with officers to create a technically sound scheme in accordance with the local development plan policy. In terms of principle, the officers touched upon the application site is within the settlement boundary. In terms of policies S1 and H1, Monmouth is the main town, is one of the main towns, top of the settlement hierarchy, where the main focus for new housing will be. The intention was for more homes, as quite rightly pointed out, but the maximum figure was shown on the layout, which is faint on the presentation, which would be 6 and 7 as an absolute total, including the replacement of Woodmancote. The intention is not to develop the entire site. As mentioned, it's a sensitively led development that responds to the site characteristics, including the topography of the site. Albeit, because of the issue of phosphates, that means no net gain in dwellings at this time. Therefore, the application before you are for a replacement dwelling, and the application after this for a second replacement dwelling. In terms of rationale, as stated earlier, the development has not been commercially driven. Rather, the applicants seek to make a positive contribution to the hometown of Monmouth. The intention is for a high-quality, exemplar scheme using passive house principles, as we've seen with the Southern orientation. This should be encouraged by the council and promoted as a flagship scheme of sensitive, low-energy, environmental responsible development. I was following advice from officers about access from Highfield Road being inappropriate in terms of it's being more constrained by mature trees, topography and reduced visibility, that the applicants purchased 8A, and in the course of the access is therefore through Highfield Close. The proposed access is taken along parallel to the hedgerow of Highfield Close residence because it follows the contours of the site, and it will also be quite hidden behind that existing hedgerow. Plus, when you take into account the proposed landscaping, it will be further reduced in visibility, so it's suitable for its landscape aspects. The access road also serves as a sustainable drainage system, as was shown on the presentation. It includes permeable paving, rain gardens and attenuation.
Your microphone's gone off.
My microphone's gone. Sorry. The system, the sustainable drainage system represents a betterment in surface water drainage. The design has been future-proof, but it's equally appropriate for 2 dwellings. There's adequate room for turning and passing on the road proposed. The neighbour concerns are primarily down to the proposed access. There has been no objection from highways officers. Additional vehicle movements are minimal. Any additional homes will be subject to future approval to the relevant standards that are in place at the time. The proposed access of a shared private street like this is not untypical of the area, looking at Vineacre and Vineyard, for instance. The proposed access will be discreetly located, and it has distances from existing dwellings that are completely in accordance with the council's own supplementary guidance. And as officers conclude in their report, the proposed development, including the access, is not considered to have a significant adverse impact on neighbouring amenity. In conclusion, we completely support the officers' recommendations on this application. The scheme represents high-quality design and a substantial improvement to the former dwelling. The passive house principles and sustainable construction proposed respond to the Council's climate emergency. The sustainable drainage system proposed provides a betterment in surface water drainage. There will be biodiversity enhancements such as pond swales, species-rich planting, and the sustainable drainage system provides a betterment. That's it from me. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thanks very much for that, John. We now move to members, unless officers particularly want to come in at the moment. Do you want to wait? Okay. In that case, we just go to the chat. So the first one I've got on my list is Jane McKenna.
Thank you, Chair. My understanding from reading through the reports and the planning portal is that residents are not upset per se by the proposed dwellings because they are replacement dwellings or their design. The concerns seem to be around visual impact, drainage, and the use of access for potential future development. But as we all know, no one has a legal right to a view, and we have to look at the application before us and not speculate what could happen with future applications, as has been mentioned previously. It's therefore about creating a happy medium and reducing the noise, lighting and visual impact, etc. on neighbours. I therefore have 3 suggestions. The first one being the construction management plan has not yet
Oh, she's frozen.
Oh, have I frozen?
Yeah.
Oh, can you hear me now?
We got you back.
Yeah. You're back, okay.
You were on,
living in rural Monmouthshire.
You were on construction management. Construction management plan was the last thing we heard.
Okay. So the construction management plan has not yet been submitted. Therefore, could we add a condition that the vehicles used in the demolition of Woodmancote and the construction of the 2 new dwellings continues to use the existing entrance on Highfield Road and is then blocked off once development has finished? This will reduce the impact on Highfield Close and cause minimal disruption to the neighbours that live there. Suggestion 2, some residents have asked whether the boundary of the replacement dwelling could be pushed west into the field by several metres from the adjacent property boundaries of number 4, 6 and 8 Highfield Close. I know in the report it says that drainage design prevents this, but the SUDS application hasn't been submitted or approved yet. So therefore, could this be considered within members' gift to ask for the dwelling to be moved west by 2 to 3 metres to allow a bigger buffer between neighbouring properties to reduce the visual impact and noise from vehicles using the drive? And thirdly, residents are concerned about the access being used for future development. Could we put a condition on the report that the access is to be used solely for the 2 new dwellings? That's it. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor McKenna. Councillor Payne.
Hi. Yeah. Excuse me. confusion. It might be just because I didn't attend yesterday, and I'm sorry for that. It's just that if we had to consider this application before us only, should we not be querying the fact that 3 to 4 times the space, green area lost, including trees and hedgerows and so on, has been lost to roadway and driveway to make this one plot much further away from the road, as is allocated to living space footprint. If it was the only house to be built on this site, why would you build it so far away from the access road and lose all that green space? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Byrne. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Chairman. I realised yesterday how very important it is for as many people as possible to go on a site visit. Previous to yesterday, I'm familiar with the area, and previously to yesterday I was thinking the close was so narrow and it should be the access onto Highfield Road. Having forgotten, although I shouldn't have forgotten, that Highfield Road is very narrow as well. After visiting it yesterday, I could see very clearly that Highfield Road is narrow. In fact, it seems narrower than Highfield Close. So my first issue saying that was the reason why I would have gone against this planning was washed away. And I do feel that we have to listen to the highways people because they are the experts. If they kept the wood cut road as it is onto Highfield Road, we are told that in order to make it safe, they'd have to fall the 3 big trees down and have a splayed entrance. Now, nobody wants to see that happen. And also, it's slightly on the brow of the hill, so it is more dangerous. When you go out at the end of Highfield Close, you have really good vision. I know people don't like to have more vehicles in their area, nobody does, but I'm sure that 2 properties aren't going to make that many more vehicles. And this is what we're looking at today. So I feel that I can, against what I thought to be in, that I can support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Powell. Councillor Riley.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to ask just one question first. Is there a logic to the way that these 2 applications have been listed? Because I feel if we'd done the second one first, we would have a different... well, the questions that I would like to ask now actually relate to Woodmancote and the access off Highfield Road. So I'm just wondering, it doesn't seem to be much logic as to why we have them in that order, other than if we approve the first one, then the second one is almost a given. Does that make sense? Anyway, let me carry on.
That bit I can understand, but we were listed because this is the oldest one.
Okay. If the entrance were to remain where it currently is, could the buildings be moved to allow a joint access for both properties off Highfield Road? This would surely enable all residents and the prospective new resident to not be disadvantaged. If the oak trees are healthy, this would mean no changes to access for Highfield Road. I drove behind the bin lorry along Highfield Close yesterday, and it had to mount the curb. You can't prevent anyone parking on Highfield Close without double yellow lines, is this an intention? In the future, if there's works necessary on Highfield Road, at whose expense would this be if you could have the access off Highfield Road? I can't see that the footways are particularly relevant if cars have to mount the curb to pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Councillor Hells.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just really wanted clarity on the hedge. There was some confusion yesterday whether the hedge that is shown on the map is a new hedge or the existing hedge. So that's all, just need clarity on that. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for that. Nobody else has indicated that they wish to speak at the moment. So, Andrew, do you want to go through those questions?
Yep, sure. I'll take it in reverse order then. I'll start with Councillor Howells. Phil, if you could just put the relevant drawing on screen. I shall try to cover that point. So I think that's the, yeah, may need to zoom in. So yeah, you can see there that, I don't know if it's possible to zoom in. Probably not.
No. If you come out with a presentation, it's like review, you can zoom into the PowerPoint.
Not like that?
Yeah, the bottom corners.
Do you want to go which part do you want?
Yeah, so I think that eastern boundary, I think, is what Councillor Howells is referring to. So what it shows is the existing hedgerow to be retained, and then there is a swale then that would run north to south. That's that green area you can see that runs. Hopefully Phil can run his cursor up and down. So that's the green area. The coloured area then effectively is the swale, which forms part of the sustainable drainage. The areas of new hedging are sort of annotated slightly differently. You can see there just to the south of plot 1, there's a new solid green outline with a that's it. So that's indicating new hedging. So the eastern boundary, which I think was the query, is existing hedge retained, and then the swale that would run north to south. You can see there, as I mentioned in the presentation, you've got the sort of position then of the compensatory tree planting, and as I said, the exact species, final detailing of those can be covered via the detailed soft and hard landscaping condition. So we could look at the sort of exact positioning of those, but does that clarify that green line that runs down there? I think perhaps was causing confusion.
Yeah, so the planting will be not on the neighbour's ground, it'll be on the developer's property.
Yeah, the planting controlled by this application and controlled by this application's conditions would need to be within the red line boundary. And I said the detailed soft landscaping condition would give us the gift to look at the exact final positioning of planting, species, etc. So, and as I said, it would be wise to engage with third-party consultation on that matter, and indeed any other conditions such as the construction traffic management plan, for example, would be wise to consult the public as well in terms of hours of operation, etc., etc. I'll just go back up through then some of the points raised. In terms of, there was a comment was made in terms of why put the replacement dwelling here with a new access road to serve it, and therefore the loss of green space. Well, in terms of that point, it does need to be considered as a whole, to some extent, with the development of Woodmancote, which would see that access closed up, and then this new safer access road to serve that dwelling. It makes sense then that this dwelling sits closest to that, rather than separating it further down, so it sits in splendid isolation. As it does, it sits neatly to the south of the Woodmancote site, rather than it being detached. Like I said, in terms of the phosphates issues, there's no timescale on when or whether that matter will be resolved. So looking at these two replacement dwellings in isolation, officers' view is that they are best both served by the safer access to the south, and they are, in terms of green space and landscape impact, it makes sense that they are sited next to one another rather than gaps being left between. And whilst, as I've said in the presentation, there is some vegetation loss, there is substantial mitigation and compensation for that. So I think that matter can be managed through those conditions. In terms of just working through some of the comments made there, just looking through now, I think the order of the applications was commented on, and like I said, they do sit in isolation. They're not, one isn't dependent on the other. They can be looked at separately, but the order is simply due to the application age. a lot of comment, and perhaps I'll defer to our colleague in Highways, in terms of the suggestion that Highfield Road be used to serve both dwellings, for example, and the associated issues with that. Like I said, our position is clearly that the southern access through Highfield Close is a safer improvement that doesn't require substantial loss of vegetation. And in some of the more sort of technical aspects, in terms of the safety of Highfield Close and on-street parking there that's been raised, Mark, I don't know if you wanted to comment on any of those points.
I'll do my best, Andrew. Chair, members and members of the public. Woodman Coat benefits from an existing access off Highfield Road, and by today's current standards, woefully inadequate. Early meetings on this site, that was proposed to access the site of Highfield Road. But I'll be perfectly candid, as I was at the site meeting yesterday, to provide a suitable access off Highfield Road, in my opinion, would have meant the loss of the total frontage in terms of vegetation and mature trees, to provide the access, visibility displays, and to improve the overall capacity and width of Highfield Road, including a footway for pedestrian use. On that basis, it was discounted, not on highway grounds, but on the material impact of such an access there. Hence, that's why Highfield Close was proposed. Sorry, is that better? My apologies. I talk quietly at the best of times. Hence, that's why Highfield Close was proposed. I have looked at Highfield Close, and again, looking at the application in front of us, which is actually one additional dwelling, because one is a replacement that had access off Highfield Close. Highfield Close, in my opinion, can accommodate the increase in traffic movements. It's very difficult to evaluate traffic movements for one dwelling, but if you imagine those two properties in the AM peaks, not everybody travels at the same time, don't get me wrong. You could expect 2 to 4 additional trip movements in the morning between 8 and 9. That is not a number that is detrimental to the continuous use of Highfield Close. Highfield Close, yes, has footways. I believe all the properties there have more than adequate off-street parking, so parking on street should be minimal. Sometimes visitors may and service vehicles may decide to park on the footway, but they shouldn't be there 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So in that opinion, I believe it is adequate. One thing I would like to mention is that since the original application, the Welsh Government have published what are referred to as common standards for highway development. And since that time, the requirement is that all authorities within Wales encourage the adoption of all residential roads and only accept private drives serving up to a maximum of 5 dwellings. In my opinion, 5 dwellings can be accommodated via private shared drive in this location, but I don't consider that an adoptable highway and an access road can be provided to serve any more than that. So if that clarifies and waylays members' fears in terms of future development, I hope that's helpful. And in that regard, I don't think I have anything further to add, but if any members got questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Andrew, was there anything else you wanted to pick up on? I got 3 more members want to speak, but finish off your list first.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'll finish off what I had. There's only a few points, and then if there's the 3 members have got other points, I'll come back after that. I think a lot of the points I've covered already, and Mark has clarified from the technical highways matter. Like I said, in terms of pushing the development west, further west, you know, the officer view is that the siting, having regard to the site topography and how it falls away, is acceptable in landscape terms, in terms of distance from third-party dwellings to the east at Highfield Close. I wasn't quite sure whether it was the local planning authority or the applicant that it was directed at in terms of engagement in consultation. Just to confirm from the local planning authority's perspective, we have engaged in the proper planning consultation process in terms of neighbour letters, etc. The case officer has gone out as well and met herself with neighbours to discuss their concerns. So I just wanted to assure members that from the LPA perspective, we have not only carried out our standard consultation obligations, but the officer has gone out directly to meet on site with residents. So I just wanted to put members' minds at ease that if that was a concern, that we hadn't properly engaged with the community on this. I think most of the other points I've either addressed through the presentation or what I commented on previously, and I say Mark has picked up the highways points, but I'll come back in if necessary once those members with their hands up have spoken.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. So, Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chair. Mine is a very quick question, and it's for Andrew. You referred to the area as a swale. Can you explain to us the nature of a swale, what its purpose is, who maintains it? Thank you.
I'll defer to my more learned technical colleague.
Some people will question that. Mind, a swale is very much a sort of a land drainage, a suds feature. To be perfectly frank, it's basically very much a very shallow depression, usually grassed. And what that does, it collects surface water and provides the primary treatment in accordance with the SAB process, where the water filters through the SAB, through the swale, and improves the water quality, and then it's directed then to a more appropriate discharge, which in this case it won't be a discharge, it'll be a attenuation pond, so it will go to this. So it acts as the primary treatment for surface water off roofs and buildings. Okay.
Thank you.
So it's not a ditch. Probably the depth of depression is probably, speaking in old language, 6 to 12 inches tops. So,
Do they need maintaining?
Microphone, please, Jan.
Sorry. Do they need maintaining? Do they get blocked, or do they just, once they're there, they work?
They are natural grass features, and sometimes they have sort of more biodiversity plants, reeds and such like that in there to filter out the nasties in the water, then, for want of a better word.
Okay, thank you.
It also slows down surface water runoff, doesn't it? So, so rather get a rush of it, that goes in there, goes in the attenuation pond, and then drains away far more slowly, so you don't get a rush of water onto the highway or in people's gardens or anything.
That's correct, Chair, yes.
Councillor Callard.
Thank you, Chair. Mine was purely just a quick point of information that the outline of number 8, I think on the plans, looks to be an old outline. The people on the visit yesterday would have seen, but from what I can see, there's been the property on the plot of number 8 has changed considerably and is now probably bigger and a bit further back than it appears on the plan that you've got in your presentation, Andrew.
Do you want to pick that up, Andrew?
Yeah, just on that.
Sorry, Chair, and apologies, Councillor Callard. I was just picking up a point from Councillor McKenna. Could you just repeat that? I do apologise.
That's all right. It's just if you go to, in fact, it's correct on that picture. Number 8, the outline of number 8 is correct on there, but on the detailed drawing that we saw, which included number 8, the outline of number 8 was incorrect, but it looks like it's right on that one. If you scroll down again, and again, and again, there just must be 2 revision levels there, so it's different there, and I don't think that represents what's actually there at the moment.
No, obviously what's approved though is the floor or the footprint then of number 8. No. No, but I don't think that's prejudiced the determination of the application in terms of consideration of distances from that dwelling, and obviously ultimately what, if it were to be approved, is only approving what's within the extent of the red line boundary rather than anything outside of that. So excellent spot, but like I said, I don't think that's prejudiced the determination of this having regard to amenity impact on number 8. I'll just come back in as I was picking up a point from Councillor McKenna in terms of the construction route going through Woodmancote to the north and using that access, if I've understood Councillor McKenna's point, coming through Highfield Road. I think both myself and Mark have already sort of expressed our concerns with the quality and suitability of the access there, irrespective of how it would accommodate larger construction vehicles. It's a dangerous and substandard access serving a single dwelling for construction traffic, and the size of associated vehicles using that route would be not something we'd be looking to support. So, we'll say the finer details of the CTMP would be borne out through the condition. I think the larger vehicles that would be needed using Highfield Road would be a significant issue, and also, the great effort has been made to try and protect those trees and their root protection areas, and construction traffic going through there would be sort of counterproductive to that. So I think for that point we would discount that as an option as the main construction route.
Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to mention, in addition to what's been said already, really comprehensive, is yesterday we noticed the right angle turning around dwelling number 8 towards the 2 new dwellings or replacement dwellings, and the answer that Mark gave was that the road was wide enough. Can you explain again, please, Mark, for everybody? Thank you.
Yes, I can. Quite right. It did mention that in my opinion, the road was wide enough, and I think we must bear in mind this access private drive is for 2 dwellings. Yes, the drive turns through 90 degrees, but I've asked for 4.5 metres, but I believe the applicant's going to build this out in excess of 5 metres. That's their choice, but that provides more room and more visibility. So I've got, and again, I must emphasise, this is private, it's not the public highway, and it's for the users of that private drive to drive in accordingly and in a safe manner, and I don't expect them to be driving anywhere near 10 miles an hour. So I think there's plenty of visibility, plenty of opportunity for visitors and the residents of those 2 properties to observe one another when exiting or egress, driving to and from their properties. So yeah, it's private land as well, to be perfectly candid with everybody.
Okay, thanks for that. Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Chair. This would be a question just for clarity. Whilst we were on site yesterday, looking at the rear of number 8, we could obviously see the hedge, and then there was a fence, a post and wire fence, field side of the hedge. I'm just curious to know, is the red line outline that we're seeing here, does that correspond with the fence or the hedge? Thank you, Chair.
It's the hedge, but I'll let Andrew just confirm that.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Rook. Yeah, as I say, that was a matter that was discussed during yesterday's site meeting. And as I said earlier, the red line, as shown, is the applicant's agent, rather, who spoke earlier, has confirmed that the stock-proof fencing is not the boundary. The site boundary, the planning application boundary, and the red line boundary is as shown. So that you can just, again, apologies, that's not as clear on the extent of that map, but we have clarified that the extent of the red line boundary. And it, as I said, the stock-proof fencing, as per the advice of the architect, is not the actual site boundary. So it's as drawn on the red line.
Does that confirm what you wanted, Dale?
Yes, it does, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Bryn.
Yeah, sorry, can I have one more quick question? As this is be a private road, does that mean residents will need to get their refuse collected either from the bottom of Highfield Close or off Highfield Road itself?
You are correct. That is correct, yes. They'll have to either place it on the curbside on Highfield Close or on Highfield Road. We are making, I believe, provision for pedestrian access onto Highfield Road.
There's plenty of room there anyway, isn't there? Right, I've got nobody else indicating that they want to speak. So, Richard, can we... do you want to... I'm sorry, you haven't registered to speak, so we need to move on.
It was just to answer Councillor McKenna's question, which I don't think was picked up, about a condition in relation to the private driveway. It was just to say that we wouldn't propose a condition like that. Any future planning application would have to be dealt with on its own merits. So that wouldn't be reasonable, I don't think, to add that condition in terms of officers' opinion. So any future development would be considered on its own merits and would be for the planning committee ultimately.
Right, Richard, if we can have the voting function up, please, and can you bear in mind that we're not talking about Woodman Coat, we're going to deal with that next. So this is the replacement for 8A. We have the voting function up now, so can you vote now, please?
Okay, that's been approved.
Thank you, everybody. That's been approved. So we now move to application DM 2021-00182, which is Woodman Coat. So, Andrew, do you want to present on that one?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll just wait for the slides to come up so that members and those third parties can see. Okay, great. So, this is similarly a full planning application for the erection of a replacement dwelling. This is Woodman Coat, which is along Highfield Road in Osbaston. And for the same reason as the previous application, it is presented at Planning Committee this afternoon as the threshold of 5 household objections has been exceeded. So, the red line application site you can see on screen to the left, and then that's a similar or identical aerial view as was presented on the previous application. I would just note at this stage, to avoid repetition of some of the issues and discussions, in terms of the issue of access and highway safety, so this is proposing to use the same access as the previous application. So I'll avoid repetition on that point. But what I will refer to in this presentation is the issue of the existing vehicular access to Woodman Coat. And then in terms of repetition issues, again, the same will apply to drainage. So I'll just go through the slides on screen. So this here is a sort of a 3D image of the proposed replacement dwelling. We'll just turn then to the next slide. So these are, you can see, I hope you can see, the blue dotted line there, which shows the original dwelling, but this shows the extent of the replacement dwelling that would sit over the footprint of that, as well as some of the tree canopies of the mature trees that we did discuss during the last application. So if we turn to the next slide. So these, so two-storey dwelling, these are the ground and first floor plans. apologies, it's a little bit difficult to make out the finer detail. I'm sure members have seen that on the council's website. In terms of the elevations, this does provide a useful sort of before and after, as it were, showing the existing dwelling and then the proposed elevations. This is the north and the east elevations, and a similar comparison there in terms of the south and the west elevations. So this shows, as per, and say it overlaps with the access arrangement. So it would be proposed to close off the existing access along the north to Highfield Road, and it would be served by then the same private driveway that was discussed previously. So that just shows that layout as well. And similarly there is the sustainable drainage plan that say has been developed alongside the SAB application. So photos, again, these are sort of similar to the previous application. That is the entrance there down through 8A Highfield Close, and that's heading west then into the site, as the photograph on the right illustrates. So some important photographs here. So on the left-hand side, you can see, Phil, thank you, between those trees there, that is the existing vehicular access into Woodmancote, and that's just shows better than the drawings. That is the existing dwelling that is to be demolished to provide the replacement. So in terms of assessment and evaluation, in terms of similar principle as previously for exactly the same reasons that were detailed, this is a replacement dwelling within the Monmouth development boundary, and its replacement is acceptable in principle, subject to detailed considerations. The first and foremost of those being visual impact. So the existing dwelling, as you've seen on the photographs, does retain some aspects that have sort of architectural and aesthetic merit. However, these have been sort of subject to incremental and piecemeal alterations, etc., over time, and the dwelling is in somewhat of a tired condition, and it's therefore considered that its loss would not be harmful to the surrounding built environment, and a replacement in principle is acceptable, subject to the design of the replacement. And the replacement dwelling here, again, adopts a very simple form. The main two-storey element would have a traditional pitch and is traditionally proportioned, would be rendered and then complemented by timber to the vertical timber cladding to the single-storey elements that would sit under a green roof. And as noted during the previous application, there isn't a prevailing architectural style within the vicinity. There are a mix of house types. So notwithstanding that, the simple design approach taken here, except that is set within the existing mature vegetation, is considered acceptable and is compliant with the requirements of policy DES 1. And similarly then, in terms of wider landscape impacts, the utilisation of the new access route and driveway to the south would enable the retention of those mature trees on site. And the development has been carefully designed to avoid the root protection areas of those mature trees, so that the new dwelling would still sit within that context. In terms of highways access, like I said, I won't repeat what was discussed at the previous application, but there are a few finer points to sort of distinguish between the two. The existing vehicle access to the site is taken from Highfield Road, and as we've seen and as our highways colleagues have confirmed, it is substandard. So the new access from Highfield Close is considered to be an improvement, and to upgrade that access would take, say, quite a considerable removal of mature vegetation. However, I would note that if members were minded to approve this application, that I would recommend an additional condition be added to agree a scheme for the closure of this access. So that would require the access to be closed either entirely or to pedestrian-only access, so that would not give the site two accesses, and it would remove the currently substandard access, and that could then be closed in accordance with an agreed scheme once the new access is brought into beneficial use. So if members were minded to approve, I would recommend that one additional condition. In terms of neighbour and residential amenity, the closest neighbouring dwellings to the site are T Bryn on Highfield Road and 4 Highfield Close. The officer's report in paragraph 6.5 details this in length, and as summarised then, that the separation distances involved, in addition to the intervening vegetation, mean that the replacement dwelling would not cause unacceptable overlooking, or would it be overbearing. The issues of vehicular movements using the access off Highfield Road are the same as those presented in the previous application. And to conclude, really, that the low vehicle movements is not considered to give rise to unacceptable noise or light that would be caused by headlights nuisance. Similarly, again, a detailed landscaping scheme would be considered that would detail the exact positioning of new compensatory planting, and for the reasons, say, given on the previous application, this would offset the loss of some of the trees to facilitate access, etc. So, in conclusion, this application also has been subject to detailed consideration with third parties, with statutory consultees, and subject to the conditions in the officer's report, in addition to an extra condition requiring a scheme and implementation of the closure of the access onto Highfield Road, it is presented with a recommendation for approval.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. I won't read out the ward members' letter again, because as I said, it did cover both applications. Aled, do you want to address the meeting again? You can do it from there if you wish, or you can come down. Again, you've got 4 minutes, okay.
Well, I'll probably keep it quite short because obviously these two applications are intrinsically linked. So from what I've heard on the first one, I don't have much faith in anything different from this one, unfortunately. Our view as residents of Highfield Close is that, as I was saying, there's a cumulative effect of all these dwellings access from Highfield Close. We think Woodmancote is got an existing access, existing dwelling, replacement dwelling, reuse that existing access. That at least sort of reduces the impact on us as residents of Highfield Close, and we think that's the correct way to go. I also think that sort of there's a huge amount of spin and sort of distortion of the facts that sort of, we haven't been consulted about these properly. I know that sort of, you're absolutely correct, the planning officer did come out to see the residents after a lot of badgering, but as soon as they turned up, they said they'd already made up their mind. They started writing their recommendation for approval. Is that honestly consultation? Is that honestly dialogue? I don't think so. And also the other issues about sort of boundary petition, etc. I think that's horrifically unfair. Yeah, so basically, from our point of view, we think this is an unnecessary addition to the development, and therefore it can be redesigned and access the existing way. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Aled. And John.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'll try and keep this brief as well. So I'm the applicant. I'm the agent for this applicant, who is the same as the previous application. The same principles apply here, and the application offers a substantial improvement to the quality of the dwelling, and also improvement in highway safety by coming via Highfield Close rather than Highfield Road. I'm around for any questions, but we fully endorse the officer's recommendation, and again, I'm available for questions.
Okay, thanks very much. Craig, do you want to...
Yeah, I just wanted to come in on the point that Mr. Roberts was saying about consultation. I appreciate, these issues are very sensitive in terms of planning process, but full consultation was done in terms of the requirements and the statutory requirements and the legislation. And my case officer did go out, Joe did come out to the neighbours and had that meeting within your kitchen, I think it was, Mr. Roberts. That isn't normal practice. This is something that we have done to try and meet the neighbours' concerns, and I appreciate that the comment you made with regards to the case officer making a decision. She wouldn't have done that. She was there to listen to the views, take those considerations into account, and obviously we're here today discussing that, and the members have to make that decision. So I think it's really, really positive that you're here and getting those views over of local residents, but I think it's unfair to say that the neighbouring parties haven't had an opportunity to comment on this application, and it is getting that full sort of rigorous review by the members today, and it is a members' decision. So our case officers have made a recommendation to members. It is now down to the elected members of the planning committee to make that decision, and it's really a positive process, this, and I know I appreciate this is really sensitive in terms of the application and the impact it has on neighbouring residents, but what we are here to consider is whether the development is acceptable in accordance with planning guidance. So I just wanted to make that point that we feel it has been consulted correctly, and that's envisaged to you being here, getting those comments over.
Okay, thank you, Craig. I've got nobody raising their hands. I think that was all discussed really in the last application. We have a recommendation before us for approval. Would somebody like to propose that we go for approval? Ben? Maureen again? Okay. Richard, can I have the function up, please? You've got that on the chat, so if anybody would like...
Sorry, are we going to go with the additional condition for the closure of the gap or pedestrian access or not? Is that what we voting on?
We are voting with that proposed addition, Councillor Payne.
Thank you. Sorry to interject.
No, that's fine. Thanks for the clarification.
So that's approved.
Okay, thank you very much. That's approved. So we now move on to the third application before us today, which is application DM 2022/00484, which is a full planning application for the construction of 9 dwellings, including means of access, drainage, landscaping, associated engineering and infrastructure works on the land of the former Tithe House, Church Road, Undy. Amy, you're presenting this one, aren't you?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, this is the application DM 2022-00484 for the residential development at Tithe House in Undy. The application is before members today due to the number of public objections. So the application site is located to the south of the railway line in Undy, occupying an L-shaped site opposite St Mary's Church. The site is former brownfield land, post the demolition of the former farmhouse and associated barns. At present, the site is open with some storage containers at the front of the site. The slides here show the aerial photography of the site and the site plan outlined in red. The site is within the development boundary, and so there is a presumption in favour of development subject to the usual material considerations. The second slide here shows the red line boundary for the proposed site and the proposed site layout. The application is for 9 dwellings serviced by 2 secondary roads within the site from 1 main access point. Plots 5 and 6 are shown with green stars here, and they provide the necessary on-site affordable housing provision. The next slide shows that to the northeast of the site, there's a public right-of-way, path 1 in purple, providing access from Church Road to the field beyond. The right-of-way runs adjacent to the length of the property Camelot. Concerns have been raised by the public rights-of-way officer in relation to the width and the alignment of the proposed right-of-way. Initially, it was proposed to redirect the path through the site following the road. However, the internal layout was amended to reflect these concerns and maintain a straight line of the path as existing. Although there still remains concerns that the path is not suitable width, it has been suggested that the the original path is 6 metres wide. This is an assumption where the exact width of a path is not clear. Please refer to paragraph 6.12 of the officer's report, which states how the Public Rights of Way officer has drawn these conclusions in terms of the width of the path. Given that there are not two physical boundaries defining the route, a default 6 metre path is assumed. In this case, the path has been a narrow track for over 20 years, far less than 6 metres. So following negotiations, it's considered that the revised width of the path to 3 metres is an improvement on the existing arrangement. In addition, the new tarmac surface will provide a more accessible and appropriate route for all users, being more inclusive than existing situation. The arrangement now provides a maximum length of path open to the street scene, with only a small section of 8.7 metres where this abuts the plot of garden number 1. A condition has been added to the officer's report requiring details of hard standing delineation of the public right-of-way prior to commencement of the development to ensure the public right-of-way from the highway. The plan on the right-hand side can show the landscaping. Oh, sorry, can we skip back one a sec? This plan shows the proposed and retained trees, including any additional landscaping. The dark green circles show T1, T2 and T3, which are protected. However, the tree officer's response states that due to ill health, there is no objection to their removal. T5 to the north of the site is not protected but is also shown as retained. Additional planting is provided in the front of the site in the form of 9 trees, with 3 additional trees within the site. This has been considered by the Green Infrastructure Officer, who is satisfied that this approach is acceptable. The proposals have also been considered by the Council's ecologist, who's raised no objections to the proposals based on the low ecological value of the site at present, and that a precautionary approach adopted in the preliminary ecological assessment is being conditioned. A biodiversity net benefit has been proposed and considered acceptable. It is identified in the assessment and addressed within condition 5 of the officer's report. The application site is also partly within a flood zone, as you can see by the blue shading on the map here. The implications of this are identified in the officer's report, where certain tests are applicable. The result is that the development is considered appropriate, given it's a previously developed site. In addition, the flood consequence assessment does not identify unacceptable harm to the locality in terms of flooding within the surrounding site. This has been reviewed by NRW, who also do not raise any objections. In order to be flood-free, the proposed dwellings are raised above the existing ground level by approximately 1 metre. This is considered acceptable in design terms where the proposed properties are set back from the road by 20 metres. Therefore, the increase in ground levels is accommodated through a graded section of grassland area at the front of the site, reducing the visual impact of the level change substantially. Some concerns have been raised by the SUDS officer. However, these are considered acceptable, and the application must be considered on the current TAN 15 guidance, where the proposals are considered to be policy compliant. The next slide shows the drainage layout. Concerns were raised over the surface water, resulting in additional drainage provided between plot 9 and 14 Bridewell Gardens. However, as you can see by the blue line, there's been identified to incorporate a French drain between these 2 properties. The left-hand side shows the adopted highway for the site and the vehicle tracking for a refuge lorry. The orange area is the adopted section, which will allow for a refuge lorry to enter the site, turn in the hammerhead, and exit site in a forward gear. Following extensive negotiations and a number of site layout variations, the proposed layout has been assessed by the Highways Officer, who raises no concerns. There are proposed refuse collection points marked as black dots on the top and the bottom of the site, where refuse will be collected on foot. So the next slide shows the proposed dwellings in relation to the existing properties around it. Concerns have been raised over potential overlooking, loss of privacy, and overdevelopment of the site. Camelot, to the east of the site, has its side facing the proposed site. Plots 5 and 6 face towards the front garden, and 3 and 4 to the rear. The intervening distances is approximately 10 metres, which is compliant with the guidance. This is considered acceptable given the estate road and public right-of-way in between. Plots 1 and 2 are to the top of the site. Plot 2, the side elevation faces the rear of Carolyn and 9A Bridewell Gardens. However, there is a single-storey extension to the rear of the existing boundary, and treatments are also to be retained. In addition to the front elevation of plot 2 is at a right angle to the rear of Carolyn, with the habitable bedroom being on the far side of the front elevation of plot 2. This is 15 metres away from the rear first floor of Carolyn. There is therefore considered that the proposals maintain reasonable standards of privacy for Carolyn and 9A Bridewell Gardens. In Bridewell Gardens, the 3 closest properties are identified on the plan, with the intervening distances at or very close to 21 metres as identified in the guidance. The closest property is Acacia, which is 20.1 metres from the rear of plots 3 and 4. Whilst this is below the 21 metres, this is only very marginally less than the distance set out in the guidance, and therefore is considered to be acceptable. The slide to the right-hand side shows the position of plot 9 in relation to the existing property of 14 Bridewell Gardens. Here, the proposed plot 9 sits 4.2 metres from the side of the existing dwelling. However, the finished floor level is raised by 1.3 metres. A later slide shows the retaining wall in more detail. The next slide shows this 45-degree angle in detail, where plot 9 is set into the site. There we go, yeah. But retains sufficient distance to maintain a 45-degree angle, providing sufficient light to the rear of the neighbour and protecting their amenity with no overshadowing. Despite concerns, these measurements are compliant with the SPG being taken from the habitable room on the ground floor, which is the dining room and not the kitchen of number 14 Bridewell Gardens. Concerns are also raised in relation to overdevelopment and the small sizes of amenity spaces. It is considered that the grain of the development as proposed is similar to the scale and density of the surrounding built form. The plots are considered to have appropriate levels of amenity space, and a simple layout allows for a legible form when read in the urban context of the site. Given the overall compliance with the SPG, it is not considered that proposals demonstrate overall overdevelopment of the site. So the next slide shows the sections through the site, that's it. Section AA at the top of the site, looking at plots 1 and 2. Section BB in the middle of the site. Both of these showing the proposed dwellings at similar levels and heights to existing properties around them. Plots 1 and 2 have a ridge height 1 metre higher than 9A Bridewell Gardens and 2 metres higher than Carolyn. However, given the distances, the position and style of the properties, this is not considered to be out of context. The next slide shows section CC. This is the street elevation of plots 7, 8 and 9, showing a very similar height to the adjacent property of 14 Bridewell Gardens. Plot 9 ridge height being 60 millimetres higher than plot 14 Bridewell Gardens. Section DD is a long section through the site up the estate road, showing the front of plots 6 to 1. So the next slide shows the sections of plot 9 at the front of the site, showing the increasing ground levels of 1 metre from existing. You can see this is the largest area of ground build-up, which is graded at the edge of the pavement and planted to reduce any harsh visual change. This shows the retaining element and boundary wall of plot number 9. The next slide shows the retaining wall detail between plot 9 and 14 Bridewell Gardens. An element of increase in ground level is shown to the outside of the retaining wall using a graded wildflower zone. This ground level is shown to be this wall will be 2.4 metres above the finished ground level of plot 9 and its highest point to the rear of the dwelling, plot 9, and 1.8 metres at the rear of the garden of plot 9. This results in a retaining wall of 2.4 metres maximum, set back 1.7 metres from the existing fence, above the graded wildflower zone to the outside of the wall. The wildflower planting here and throughout the site, as well as the public spaces, will be maintained by a management company for the site. So the following slides show the proposed elevations of a few of the plots. Here we can see plots 3 and 4 with roof lights to the front serving the roof space. The next slide shows plots 5 and 6, the affordable units, finished in render and a grey slate roof to match all the other properties. The next slide is plot 9, again facing the front of the site, grey slate roof and a rendered finish, noting the obscure glazing to the side left. The next slide shows the floor plan of plot 9 with integrated garage. So the next slide shows the buildings formerly on site, showing the farmhouse and barns. So the following slide shows CGI views of the proposed development and to give an impression what it would look like when it was finished. The top image is plot 7, 8 and 9 facing the road, showing the graded change in levels, and the lower image is looking into the site at the entrance of plots 3 to 6. The next slide shows the site as existing. These are views looking up and down from the footpath, and all members have visited site and will be familiar with all of these views. Again, the next slide shows the views of the entrance of the site looking into and out of the junction. And the next shows views to the rear of existing properties of Bridewell Gardens. And the next shows shipping containers on the site, which show where the proposed access is to be positioned between these and the existing property of Camelot. So the next slide shows the views into the site from the rear and the fields beyond. Here the existing fencing to the boundary of Camelot can be seen and the existing field gate to that playing fields. Concerns have been raised that the development will preclude the access of vehicles into the playing field. However, this right of access is a civil issue between the landowners and not part of the consideration of the planning application. It is considered that the amendments made to the public right of way are acceptable and sufficient in improving the current situation. So the next slide shows views into and out of the site of the adjacent 14 Bridewell Gardens, showing the property and land as well as existing boundary treatments. Concerns have also been raised over contaminated land, but the documents submitted with the application show low levels of contamination on the site. The proposed development would help to address these issues using a capping layer of clean soil on all properties during construction. Conditions are applied to consent to address the best method of capping and investigation through a remediation strategy, method statement and a risk assessment, all to be considered by the Council's Environmental Health Officer. In relation to noise, concerns have been raised over the potential for noise disruption due to the proximity of the railway line. As per the officer's report, the line is 75 metres away and is not considered to warrant a noise assessment prior to determining the application. In addition, a condition is proposed to secure triple glazing to the rear elevations of plots 1 and 2 closest to the railway line. Concerns have also been raised in terms of the capacity of the drainage network. However, there are no objections from Welsh Water. In addition, the application will benefit from a SUDS application dealing with all surface water drainage. Overall, the development is considered to be policy compliant and is therefore recommended to members today for approval, subject to the conditions set out fully in the officer's report. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. And Craig, I understand we've had a letter from Welsh Government that you want to tell us about.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, members, we've had a notification from Welsh Government officials yesterday just to outline that they've been asked by a third party to consider whether to call this application in for consideration. Now, this is a normal process. Welsh Government officials will have 21 days to establish whether it is of national significance and the application should be called in or not. This has happened on a number of applications over the years. So members don't need to consider this at all in terms of their determination today. We can still carry on and conclude the application in terms of a decision, but we wouldn't be able to issue the decision notice until Welsh Government officials made their final decision. So we're still completely right that members consider this application today and consider all the views that need to come into place in terms of making your decision. But just so you're aware, the Welsh Government are also reviewing this as well. But it shouldn't have, well, it doesn't have any implication in terms of how you should be thinking about the planning application at all.
Okay, thank you, Craig. So we now move toward members and Councillor Sandals.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. This proposal falls within my ward, and I've been consulted by a number of residents with grave concerns regarding this development. I've visited and spoken to residents, and I'd like to put my views forward here. As you all know from my objection on the planning portal, I believe the number of dwellings on this small site is excessive and is an overdevelopment for this area. The plan is for 9 homes where only 1 2-storey building and some outbuildings stood previously. According to the site plan, there are clearly 2 pinch points, plot 1 with the public right-of-way, more of which in a minute, and plot 9 with regards to 14 Bridewell Gardens, overlooking and possibly creating problems with surface water draining into the property from the new development. As you have heard, the ridge height of the proposed properties compared to the existing properties in Bridewell show a disparity in the heights, which won't be aesthetically pleasing to the eye. I also share concerns about the width of the planned roads on the site. It'll be difficult for large vehicles such as refuse collections and large delivery lorries to gain access. There is also nowhere really for vehicles to turn, therefore necessitating them to be reversing all the way back to the existing road, which will of course be hazardous. Regarding the public right-of-way, there's currently a 6-metre wide public right-of-way, and I know it was brought up by Amy earlier, but if you actually look on one of those photos, you can see where the original 6-metre used to be, because there's a farm gate next to the original gate. So I presume that was where the original 6-metre right-of-way was. And that's running through the site, and it's listed by Welsh Government as an active travel route. The route is used extensively by the general public, myself included, as it connects Church Road to Undie Playing Field. In the plan, it's been reduced by half to 3 metres. The Active Travel Wales Act 2013 requires local authorities to enhance, not reduce, the provision for walkers and cyclists. The end 20 metres of the public right-of-way runs alongside Plot 1's boundary. It is probably inevitable that the occupants will erect a 2-metre high fence alongside their property to prevent overlooking. Together with the high boundary wall at Camelot, this will possibly create a dark tunnel effect and possibly will encourage crime and antisocial behaviour, and perhaps youths to gather. Finally, there's no separation buffer between the public right-of-way and the road, which is a safety risk for pedestrians, including children and the mobility impaired. In view of all these reservations, as ward member for Mega East and Undie, I'm strongly objecting to this development in its current format. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sandals. This is a 2-member ward. John, do you wish to address this? No? Or shall I take everybody else and then bring you in later? Okay, we'll do that. In that case, then we have a representative of the objectors, Sandra Lloyd. Sandra, if you'd like to come up to the... Just to remind you, you have 4 minutes.
I'll just explain this first, hopefully not within my 4 minutes. I've had some chemotherapy on my face for skin cancer, so I haven't been in a fight and I haven't been in an accident. So good afternoon. This development site is set in Undie Old Village, a semi-rural setting characterised by large, spacious properties and gardens, and the historic site of St Mary's Church and Graveyard. The net density of the development site is 30 dwellings per hectare. The officer's report states this is similar to the adjoining housing development at Bridewell Gardens. It's not similar at all. Bridewell Gardens is just over half the density of this development, and to match it, this development site should be a maximum of 5 dwellings. The net density far exceeds the surrounding area and so does not comply with Policy DES 1 or Planning Policy Wales. Plot 9 is on floodplain and is to be raised by 2 metres from the Church Road level and 1.2 metres higher and set back 8 metres from the neighbouring property, 14 Bridewell Gardens. It's the raised height and offset that's the problem, not the distance between those properties. The 45-degree splay line rule, when measured from number 14's nearest habitable room window, fails significantly. The residents of number 14 will have a solid wall comprising a house wall and retaining wall of between 8.1 metres and 3.3 metres high from their ground level, running along their side boundary, blocking their daylight. It will have a profound effect on their quality of life. The site consists of 2 narrow private drives into cul-de-sacs with no turning heads. No tracking analysis has been conducted to determine if larger vehicles can turn at the end of these. It's contended that they can't, and vehicles will have to reverse long distances to access or egress these properties. To service plot 9, the reverse is 87 metres. Any attempt to turn outside plot 9 could result in a vehicle falling into the swale or even down the steep gradient onto Church Road and footpath. To service plot 2, the reverse is 70 metres unless the vehicle uses the public right-of-way to turn. The single turning head is only 6 metres from the site junction with Church Road. There will be conflict at this junction with vehicles reversing and parking there. This will cause traffic to back up along Church Road where there is a blind bend, putting cyclists and horse riders at risk. Tracking analysis has been conducted at the single turning head. It shows the bin lorry can't make the turn without encroaching on the public right-of-way. The bin lorry will not come beyond the turning head as it can't turn anywhere else on site. And despite the plans showing some bin collection points, which they don't have the authority to enforce, the Highways Officer's report states refuse is to be left at the turning head.
You have a minute left, Sandy.
The residents of plot 9 will have to carry their waste at least 66 metres uphill, and from plot 2, 51 metres. Does the planning authority really expect the residents, possibly a mobility impaired person, to carry their heavy waste such a distance? There are 9 family homes producing at least 18 flimsy red and purple bags and 9 food bins on recycle day and 9 black bin bags and glass bins on general waste day. Where will they put this huge pile of stinking waste? On the road, on the footpath, on the green infrastructure, on the public right-of-way? It'll encourage rats and vermin to tear open the bags, littering the area. The Environmental Health Officer has not commented at all on the public health issue. It'll be visible from Church Road and St Mary's Church, where regular services, including funeral services and events, are held. How appalling when people are coming to the church for a funeral service and to bury a loved one.
Can you start winding up now, please, Sandy?
It will encourage fly tipping and antisocial behaviour. What kind of placemaking and well-being is this? Please don't allow any of these issues to be conditioned. They can't be resolved without a site redesign. The residents hope you'll consider these points and propose refusal of this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. We have the agent now, Joe? Just to remind you, you have 4 minutes as well.
Thank you, Chair and members. I'm Joe Ayukani, a Director at Highlight Planning and Planning Agent for GHR Developments. GHR Developments are a South Wales-based family-run company delivering exceptional quality homes, such as those at the Manor Park development in Roggett. The planning application we're considering today has been subject to extensive pre-application dialogue and has undergone rigorous examination by your officers, resulting in their recommendation of approval. With a planning history that dates back to 2004, the land is a long-standing infill development site, having previously had planning permission for 10 homes. The principle of developing the site for housing is firmly established. I commend your officers for their thorough examination of the application. They know this site inside out. Their report confirms that the proposal before you meets all of the Council's planning policies and guidance. I'd like to thank Councillor Sandals and Councillor Crook for their comments throughout the course of the application many of which have been addressed with amendments to the initial application submission. I'll now take a moment to address the comments raised regarding the 4 issues of density, the public right-of-way, flood risk and highways. Firstly, our proposal meets the Council's LDP density policy, providing 30 homes per hectare. It's entirely in keeping with the suburban character of the site, whilst making an efficient use of this previously developed infill site, something which is promoted by Planning Policy Wales. The change in ridge heights that have been mentioned across the site's frontage would be barely perceptible when read from ground level. Secondly, the public right-of-way issue has been addressed by your planning officers in their report, who confirm that the 3-metre wide paved footpath is an enhancement that not only meets the Welsh Government's active travel guidance, but would offer a safe and comfortable space for walkers, families and young children. I'm not one for theatrics, but just to give you an idea of how far a 3-metre wide footpath would be, you'll have to watch out, Phil. Okay, so that's the 3-metre wide footpath. That's ample distance for walkers, cyclists, pushchairs, the rest of it. Thanks. There's no planning grounds to make a footpath any wider than 3 metres in this location. Thirdly, whilst the drainage officer has no objection to the submitted drainage strategy, he has raised concerns about the draft flood maps. The drainage officer's comments were made in advance of the current consultation on TAN 15, which now does allow some residential development in flood risk areas. In any case, the draft flood maps in the consultation draft of TAN 15 have no status in planning terms and are subject to further review. We can only base our decision today on the current flood maps and the advice of NRW. NRW have reviewed the flood risk assessment, agree with its recommendations, and have no objection to this application. Fourthly, the site is sustainably located and well connected to daily amenities. The Highway Authority have comprehensively assessed the proposals. Thanks. The Highway Authority have comprehensively assessed the proposals and fully support the application. The approach to waste collection is consistent with national policy and guidance. In conclusion, the application delivers a range of benefits, from providing family housing, affordable housing, green infrastructure, a pedestrian link using the enhanced public right-of-way, and the remediation of a site which, if planning permission is not granted and the site is left undeveloped, would remain contaminated with asbestos. I'd like to thank you all for your time in considering the application and respectfully request that you approve it in line with your officer's recommendation. If there are any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Councillor Cook, you haven't put your hand up. Do you want to use your time to sum up?
Yes, please, Chair, if I may.
Yeah, okay, no problem at all. So, Councillor Bryn.
And then perhaps I can sum up at the end of the period of time also.
Well, you can do the same.
Same time, okay,
do
fine.
It all in one.
Clearly, as I see, the planning objectives are to achieve a good standard of design in order to avoid the bland development which we have before us today. Standardised appearance of some recent urban expansion to ensure that new development respects and enhances its surroundings and responds to the local distinctiveness, and to avoid developments that have an inappropriate scale and character, especially in the country rural areas. This current design does not comply with policies S7, DES1, MV2 and MV3, as it does not respect the character and the distinctiveness of a site and its location. For example, S7 deals with the countryside in some depth, especially that the policy's planned areas beyond the green belts. DES1 deals with place-making and design within Monmouthshire built historic natural environment, and would therefore draw your attention to criteria I and links to criteria L especially. I can read those out if you so wish, but I didn't want to waste my time as I only have 6 minutes. But certainly I makes the most efficient use of land compatible with the above criteria, including that the minimum and net density of residential development should be 30 dwellings per hectare, subject to criteria L. L ensures that existing residential area characterised by high standards of privacy and spaciousness are protected from overdevelopment and insensitive or inappropriate infill. So we go on to the area of the overpowering of plot 9 to the plot 14 of Bridewell Gardens is totally unacceptable. The poor spacing of plot 7, 8 and 9, which are so close to each other, it's going to be difficult to maintain in the future. And if we look at the area where it says, where are we protecting existing spaciousness from overdevelopment and insensitive and inappropriate infill, as mentioned in the policy. Policy MV2, sustainable transport access. Development should link into the existing or proposed public rights of way, walking, cycleways and green infrastructure network, and there will be reflection in the layout and conditions and obligations of any permission granted. Not to mention the poor vehicle access, which has been mentioned in the previous speeches. This layout and design does not provide adequate provision for this size of development. Policy M32, public rights of way. Development that should obstruct or adversely affect a public right-of-way will not be permitted unless satisfactory provision is made which maintains the convenience, safety and visual amenities offered by the original right-of-way. I could go on talking in this policy, but there is much more that this application needs to adhere to. The site has a long-standing history of rural development and country life. And therefore we need to protect that. The PRIO officer is clearly in his consultation that a 4-metre segregated path should be delivered for the full length of this site. This then would enable the number of houses designed layout to follow. As far as the character of the site and the large single-family dwelling existed previously and historically, the advice from the previous applications on this site has been recommended for 6 dwellings. The community realises that the redevelopment at Tithe House is inevitable, but in a different format to what is proposed, but not at the expense of the local important community facilities. Distinctiveness is enshrined in national guidelines and our own policies. I would question why we are proposing a public footpath of 3 metres when the right-of-way officer is insisting that it's 4. Not to mention the overdevelopment of the unique hospital site, the only area left available on Church Road. Until this scheme is amended to protect and deliver the retention of this historic path, and the area of the scheme cannot be supported by the community or myself. It should be rejected on this policy alone of DES, a clear message sent back to the applicant to go back to the drawing board and blend into the community and not impose on it. Sorry, I have one more. I've lost it. Sorry. So just to sum up, if I may, just because the site is within the settlement boundary doesn't mean that development can proceed that does not relate to existing form and character. The developer's value aspiration should not override the local character and essential linkages of the village. The southern part of Undy is wholly different to that of the northern southern expansion between B4245 and M4, and this site should not follow that suburban volume house building approach. Average density should not just be generally applied. It depends on the site circumstances, the shape, the contents, the linkages and the constraints should indicate the scale of development acceptable. If this site is to be developed, it must proceed for the benefit of all, within a design framework that respects the full planning balances of all issues. Planning law is based on the principle of each application on its own merits, respecting the particular area in question. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cook. We go to the hands up now, so Councillor Bryn.
Hi, thank you for everyone. I'm afraid I'm in agreement with Councillor Sandals and Crook here. I'm really concerned. I can't see how reducing a public right of way from 6 metres to 3 metres just by tarmacking it is an improvement, but especially considering that the very end of this public right of way might be tunnelled, and if people need to access this in the winter when light is poor, it might it might make people nervous to use the access really going forward. So yeah, just in light of that, really, I think it's a detriment to the local populace, really. So I'd like to see that addressed. I think there's just too many it's plot one, isn't it? It's just too many. It's one house too many at that point, particularly. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Payne. Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to say that I have visited this site at an earlier date, although I wasn't there at the meeting yesterday. There is one question I have. And it does. Thank you very much for the illustration, by the way, of what 3 metres is like. That was very, very helpful. I did not walk around the entire playing field while I was there, so I don't know the answer to this, and perhaps you would be able to supply me with the answer. Is this? Are there other access points into the playing field? My concern really is about emergency ambulances. Because, you know, we do know that when people are on playing fields that sometimes emergency ambulances are needed. Would this be the main access for? Is there another area where?
No, there's a road access with clubhouse and stands
Excellent.
And everything at the other end.
Thank you. That's just put my mind at rest, really. And that was that point. The other thing is I'm going to ask is it's a development of 9 houses. Would there therefore be some community benefit from this via generating some S106 funds?
In terms of the 106 contribution, there's an affordable housing contribution, and it is actually on site. So we're getting 2 affordable units, plot 5 and 6, on site.
So there'll be nothing further to come to the community?
No.
No. Okay. Thank you very much for that.
Councillor Easton.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've got a couple of concerns. I note that this would be on the projected floodplain. I think that should be noted quite strongly. But the density of 9 properties, in my view, is too many. But even assuming there would be 9 properties, I think the affordable house allocation is too low. The aspiration of this council is to have more than 35%. I see in the report 20% is quoted. I would like to see at least 30% or whatever figure might be come out of this application should it go forward. The public right of way, the only strong objectors on this application was the public right of way officer. I'd like the public right of way officer to be here today to explain what is actually been talked about, because it's a complicated thing with the definitive map and things like that. It also states in the application that the applicant wants to drop it down to 3 metres, but before you can get it down to 3 metres and the development can continue, there's got to be a decision by the officers of the public right-of-way and the definitive map and that sort of way forward. So I got concerns about lots of trailing ends which are not really put together. So that's my main concerns: the public right-of-way, and the fact that it may not be an adopted road, so it'll mean that you've got to take all the rubbish out onto the main road outside the church. And I'd like to have more thought on affordable housing to be in the 30-35% bracket, which is an aspiration. 20% is, well, it says 25%, but I think that's too low. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Easton. Councillor Bromfield.
Hi, thanks, Chair, and thank you, Amy, for your presentation. I too have some concerns with this application. From viewing the site, I have to echo the concerns from the local members and other committee members that 9 dwellings seems excessive for an area of land this size. You know, it's less than an acre, and I feel this would be an overdevelopment. I have to wonder if this proposal should be approved, it would feel overcrowded. I appreciate that officers are satisfied there is a sufficient distance between the proposed dwellings and the neighbouring properties, but I totally sympathise that neighbouring properties will feel a lack of privacy, especially considering that due to it being on a flood risk, that the ground levels will be raised, so that will enhance to a feeling of loss of privacy. As we can see from the site plans, the limited turning points for larger vehicles, such as service vehicles, delivery vehicles, moving lorries and emergency vehicles. So with that in mind, that can only suggest that on occasion the main road leading into the site will be occasionally obstructed, and that will then therefore have a negative effect on the highway and the road users. I'm also concerned of the lack of active travel, and the public rights of way team quote, "Instead of enhancing and improving the path, this application seeks to diminish the size of the path." Although officers are satisfied a 3-metre path is in keeping with other developments, an application to reduce the size of the path is still required, and as stated in the report, these are not always granted. So surely that application with the public rights of way should have gone in conjunction with this application. They should have been done at the same time. Whilst I welcome there's provision for the affordable housing, I would like to ask officers if it is, sorry, it's my cat, I'm so sorry. I don't know if you heard that. So I'd like to ask officers if it's within our gift to lower the number of proposed dwellings on this application from 9, which I've stated seems excessive. If this is something we could do, we could incorporate a sufficient active travel scheme, improve the highway within the site, and alleviate some concerns from neighbouring properties. However, I'm not sure that is within our gifts, so I would just seek some clarity on that. Thank you, and sorry about the background noise.
That's okay, Councillor Barnfield. We've got quite a lot of questions come out of that. I'm conscious that Councillor Bond and Councillor Hells want to come in, but can I ask officers to clear those questions up first, please, before we get too far away from them?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've been trying to take notes and I hopefully cover everything, but if I don't, please feel free to shout up again. So firstly, in relation to the principle of overdevelopment, Councillor Cook quite rightly identifies policy S7 and DES1 as 2 key policies here. So F7 talks about infrastructure in relation to development. It talks about making sure that's all provided on site. That's highways, that's GI, that's affordable housing as well. So as you can see, and I'm sure Mark will join in later on the points in relation to highways, that is sufficient. The GI is sufficient. The affordable housing is policy compliant in relation to 25% in 7 side, and it is on site, which is a really important thing to note. Some developments where we have an off-site financial contribution, here it is actually on site and will make a big benefit to the residents of the area. So that's all important to ensure that that's policy compliant. In relation to DES1, again, that's quite rightly raised. That criteria I identifies a minimum requirement of 30 dwellings per hectare, subject to criteria L, which maintains high privacy standards. But again, as we've described through the presentation here, and you can see the separation distances, they are all compliant with the supplementary planning guidance that is adopted and sets those standards to be adhered to. So the application as proposed, which has been amended a number of times, is all policy compliant with the infill SPG. It is also not a rural environment, it is an urban environment. It has a residential development all around it, and it is considered that the layout and the approach to the site in terms of the density, the position of the properties is relevant to that, to the adjacent residential developments. In terms of the gaps in between the properties, in terms of maintenance, again, this isn't a planning consideration. You would often find that dwellings are put closer together, and Future Wales does promote a more efficient use of land. So overall, officers consider that 9 properties can be accommodated on this site, maintaining those privacy standards and in compliance with Future Wales, again, making efficient use of land. In terms of the change of levels, I take that on board in relation to the flooding. Again, those have been carefully considered, ensuring that the properties are not overbearing on adjacent properties, and ensuring that the change in levels is managed effectively through graded sections and planting. So it's not going to be, the properties aren't going to appear like they're on a platform or on steps. Again, in relation to flooding, the application, as mentioned previously, needs to be considered in line with current policy, and it is compliant with current policy. NRW have reviewed the flood consequence assessment and have no objections into the way that flooding is managed on the site or any implications for off-site flooding. In relation to refuge and bin stores, we did consider to have bin stores on site where residents would put their refuge in a covered area. However, it was considered that actually that would require maintenance issues and would encourage more mess. So refuge will be put in those 2 points as identified on the plan earlier, on the days early in collection or the night before, and then picked up. The refuge lorry will reverse into the hammerhead, and the refuge collectors will walk to the refuge, pick it up and put it in the lorry. There were some concerns over whether that would create a detrimental appearance in the street scene or a collection of rubbish. However, officers consider that the residents will have to take a personal and social responsibility to kind of maintaining and looking after their own rubbish and refuge. In relation to the public right-of-way, I would draw you to paragraph 6.12 of the officer's report, where the public rights-of-way officer specifies how this 6 metre wide measurement was drawn. So where the width of a path is not defined by statute, physical boundaries or the definitive statements, its width is a matter of evidence that habitually used by the public. The path in question follows a track. It should therefore be assumed that the right-of-way is at least as wide as the track and probably as wide as the historic boundaries it ran between, i.e. about 6 metres wide. So it is not definitive that the existing path is 6 metres wide. There is an assumption. So officers have taken the current situation, which has been like this for quite considerable time, of a narrow, worn path up the side of the property of Camelot. And it is considered that 3 metres is substantially more than the current arrangement. It'll also be a clear tarmacked path, which will be accessible for all, wheelchairs, pushchairs, etc., and all labels. So that's considered to be a positive. Just checking, do you want to do highways? Should we answer some of the highways concerns?
I'll do my best. Could I possibly ask for the general layout drawing put up for members' benefit, please? Again, I think that'll suffice. I actually struggle to see the size of the screen, so hopefully members can make out what I'm about to say. A few of the members, and I believe one of the objectors raised concerns that vehicles would end up having to reverse off Church Road or cause congestion there. And I think the drawing you've got in front of you shows the vehicle tracking for a refuse vehicle. That clearly shows that the refuse vehicle drives in a forward gear, turns around in the hammerhead, which Phil is kindly sort of showing with his cursor, and then exits in a forward gear. So in terms of, we design turning heads to accommodate the largest sort of domestic vehicle that will visit properties, and that is our refuse vehicle. And we operate, unfortunately, the largest refuse vehicles that we can acquire. So that can turn adequately within that turning head, which will be public highway, will be adopted by us as the highway authority and be maintained for us by us in perpetuity. It will not be turning around on Church Road. It will drive in a forward gear, it will turn around, it will collect the refuse from the curbside. And I would emphasise that all the properties on Church Road are collected from the curbside. The only difference here is that residents may well, via their private drive, have to carry a little bit further. And that's the only issue that I think we're faced with here. And as Amy alluded to,
I didn't think that was a concern. I thought it was that there was, if a delivery driver drives all the way down to an end house to drop something off, it
I
has
was
to
about to
reverse.
come to that, if I may. Yeah. No, I believe the comments were made regarding congestion on Church. Delivery vehicles have got the option to either use the private drive and take a chance of turning in the property that they're delivering to's turning area, parking space, or they can reverse down the drive. That is a personal choice. That's private land then. Yeah, so that's their choice. Or they can park in the turning area for a short duration of time and deliver to the premises. So I think if I take you back to the previous application you determined, that was off a private drive. What we've created here, or the proposal that's come forward, is an adoptable highway with an adequate turning head with 2 private drives off it. So if you consider what we approved previously and consider the context of that application with this one, we have provided an adequate turning provision for the largest service vehicle to turn, and that is a refuse vehicle. Other than that, I'm sure you'll help me out if I haven't picked up anything else. I won't comment on the public right-of-way, that's not my place to, and I won't comment on active travel either, because that's up for other officers. What I would say from there, the 3-metre wide footway will be adopted over its length as part of the public highway. So I think somebody raised concern for the safety of pedestrians and whatever in its proximity to the turning head. Well, that will be adopted as part of the public highway and be maintained by us in perpetuity as well. Thereafter, to the playing fields, it will remain as a public right-of-way. I trust that clarifies that position.
Chair, could I come in on that, please? Just a moment.
Go on.
Certainly, I understand what you're saying, Mark, but it is not actually correct with the guidance from Active Travel and Welsh Government. They have recommended that you do not follow a public right-of-way along new estate roads. This road and this public right-of-way does not have any demarcation whatsoever. And it doesn't have a curb, and therefore it is liable to accidents. This footpath is being used by between 200 and 300 children on Saturdays and Sundays, and that is the issue. The issue is that it is not following Active Travel guidelines or Welsh guidelines, Welsh Government guidelines of a footpath travelling along new estate roads.
Amy, do you want to pick that up?
I was going to say yes. Can I answer that, if that's okay? Yes, in relation to the footpath, it's not an active travel route. It's a local walking route. There is a slight difference, but we acknowledge the fact that it is used, that the playing fields are there, which is why we are considered as 3-metre wide is acceptable, and it retains this path in perpetuity and improves it from its current condition. The alignment of the path is not changing now. It was originally to come in, and then whether there was a kink in the estate road and then to rejoin where it is now, that's changed. It is going to maintain its straight line as it is. So whilst we have an estate road adjacent to it, we're not realigning the public right-of-way to be in line with the estate road, which is what the intent of that policy element is. In addition, I forgot to mention earlier, but I think I did in the presentation, that there is a condition on the officer's report. It is condition number... It refers to full details of the public right-of-way should be submitted to prior to commencement of development in relation to hard standing, delineation and design of the public right-of-way, so that will all come into us prior to the commencement of development. We will consult with the public rights-of-way officer when that discharge of condition application comes in, and we will also consult with neighbours in relation to the details of that public right-of-way. So it's ensuring that there is demarcation between the existing state road and that the public right-of-way is clearly defined. Whether there are proposed to be physical boundaries in between the two in state of bollards, that isn't the detail of this application, that is the detail of that condition. So that will be required and covered through that with the appropriate consultation. hopefully have covered everything else. Did you want to go to, I know since other members have got their hands up, do you want to do those questions?
Yeah, sure. Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, I agree with what's been said, most of what's been said already, and I've visited the sites with the other planning committee members previously. I'd just like to check, please. So the only changes that are from the last planning application are that there's a slight increase in the path size, and also, is there a change to the size of the affordable houses at all, please? Could someone answer that? And also, obviously, we've checked before that it's 20% of market value is affordable housing. Thank you. And the other concerns I have are the buffer, which Amy's just spoke about, the buffer to the public right-of-way, and this tunnelling effect that's been, or the impact of the tunnelling part, which is a very open area at the moment, and the feelings of vulnerability walking through there. And the other, so that's the one about the tunnelling, and you've just mentioned that it could be a condition that there is a physical boundary, which I think there should be, so that people don't drive onto that, because obviously it's making people in danger, or risk at least. And the other one is the overpowering of number 14 Bridewell Gardens. I think the wall is so imposing by the number 9 of the plan. So really, number one and the tunnelling issue, and number 9 is of issue in my. I'm concerned for both those. So whether the new plan could be reduced by those two, but please answer if the affordable houses have been reduced in size, and I just want to register the concerns about the tunnelling and the imposing wall. I would not like to be living next to that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bond. Before we go to the answers to that, let's just pick up Councillor Howells.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, mine was similar to Councillor Jill Bond there. Also, with the tunnelling effect at plot 1, are we allowed to put a restriction on the sort of the height of the fence along there, or is there already a restriction applied to that fence? Thanks.
Okay, thanks for that. Amy, do you want to answer those two?
Yes, so firstly, in relation to the changes in this application, in these plans and the reconsultation, there's no change to the public right-of-way. It has been 3 metres for some considerable time. And there's no change to the size of the affordable housing units. They meet the Welsh DQR standards. The change in the reconsultation was in relation to plots 3 and 4. In relation to the public right-of-way and the tunnelling effect, please could you get the site plan up? The public right-of-way is open through to pretty much most of the development. There's a very small section that is a 9-metre length. I think when we were on site the last time, members, we actually walked this and stood there, looked at it in quite a lot of detail. So there is a 9-metre stretch of a 1.8 metre high screen wall that extends from the side of Unit 1 to the back, where at the end of the site. The front portion of the garden is enclosed by a small metal hooped fence. So that's completely open at that parking area and the front garden. It is only the rear garden and a small section of the side, which is 9 metres in length, which will be enclosed. When we walked it, you could see that is a very straight piece of public right-of-way. You can clearly see where you're going, where you're coming from, and it is, as I say, 3 metres wide that we saw today. So if there was a 90-degree bend in there, or if there was a loss of visibility, I think we would be saying the same thing, that we would have problems with this screen wall, but we don't consider the 3-metre width or a 1.8 high metre wall to create an unacceptable tunnelling effect that would warrant refusal of the application. I wonder whether members would like us to add another condition to remove PD rights in relation to walls and fences and boundary treatments to maintain those in perpetuity. There's some management of boundary treatments in the future. I will leave that to yourselves. And then if you could go to the sections as well, I'd like to answer the comments in relation to the overpowering of Unit 9 and 14 Bridewell Gardens. As you can see, the 45-degree line has been provided and has been measured in accordance with the supplementary planning guidance. It does maintain appropriate light to the rear back garden. It is a north-facing garden. It isn't open to the rear and the side, and it does have a boundary fence at present. The next section, I think it shows the height, or possibly keep going, of plot 9 will be 7.7 metres at its highest point from the ridge height. It's the long section I was looking for. That's it. So at its highest point, plot 9 will be 7.7 metres high, and the boundary wall at its highest point will be 2.4 metres high above existing ground levels, reducing to 1.8, which is a standard garden boundary fence height at the rear of the property. The dotted line, as you can see on there, shows the existing ground levels, and then the base of the retaining wall will be the proposed ground levels. It isn't considered that Unit 9, it's acknowledged that there is an impact on Unit 14 Bridewell Gardens, but it isn't considered that the impact of Unit 9 is sufficiently detrimental to warrant refusal of the application. I note the comments in relation to overdevelopment of the site, but I would remind members that the application before you is for 9 houses. It's not for 8 or 7. So we are making a decision on whether we think the application is suitable and appropriate in compliance with guidance for these 9 houses. And as we've set out in the officer's report and the presentation, it is policy compliant in all respects, and officers consider the application is appropriate. Hope I've covered all those points there. Thanks.
Thank you, Amy. Before I pick up the next two, Dale, Craig, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just want to come in, there's some quite clear points coming up from members. I wanted to just try and give a bit of help and support, really, in terms of your consideration of this planning application. So overdevelopment has certainly been mentioned a number of times. From my conversations and discussions with Welsh Government and what's outlined in Future Wales, they are looking to use land the most efficient way possible, delivering housing solutions. And this site, I would suggest, 9 dwellings on a plot of this size is deemed to be acceptable. They are talking about up to 50 dwellings per hectare, this is 30 dwellings per hectare, so that just gives you a bit of, in terms of the difference, in terms of, we have to take into account context there, but in a Monmouthshire context, this is a very housed area, residential properties. I certainly don't feel that 9 dwellings on this site is an overdevelopment of the site, but that's certainly for members to consider as you move forward. The other matter is around the public right-of-way. There's been significant conversations and discussions on it today. I think if any of you members have gone on and looked at the history of this site, there's been significant amendments. So your officers have been working very hard to amend the scheme to address all of the concerns that have been raised by local residents and local members, and particularly around the public right-of-way. So the scheme was designed completely differently previously, with the backs and a significant tunnelling effect along the public right-of-way is now completely open. It will be retained for 3 metres in perpetuity, which is over and above what it is at the moment in terms of that maintenance. This would secure it, so it is a betterment on the existing arrangement. So that is something to consider. Amy has suggested removing the PD rights from plot 1, and I would suggest that would be a good idea to ensure that tunnelling effect can be reduced, but I wouldn't suggest that tunnelling effect is significantly adverse to warrant refusing the planning application. This is also a walking route which would connect to the wider active travel link, so having that 3 metres secured in perpetuity is a really positive thing in terms of those connections and those active travel links. So I just wanted to get a bit of context, really, in terms of those aspects. There was also the concern with regards to the amount of affordable housing we have from Councillor Eason. This is fully policy compliant, so it delivers 25% affordable housing in accordance with the LDP. As we know as members, the aspirations in the new replacement local development plan is to deliver 50-50 affordable housing schemes. So we can't impose that on this scheme. We're working within the existing local development plan, but certainly moving forward, we will be working towards that aspiration if we can get that adopted, but appreciates that this is fully policy compliant at the moment. And one of the other aspects that I think members need to be aware of is that this scheme is delivering affordable housing for this development proposal. The viability is difficult on this scheme. I've had those conversations with the applicant and the agents in terms of the development economics, but the benefit is we are getting affordable housing from this development proposal. And if we reduce the scheme in terms of that overdevelopment aspect, then that might need to be reviewed and reconsidered. So that's something else to consider in terms of your proposals. So Amy is right. We have to, as members, look at whether the development in front of you is acceptable or not, rather than review whether it could be 7, 6, whatever it could be. I think we have to determine whether this development proposal is acceptable and meets all policy requirements. So just wanted to give that bit of guidance in terms of those 3 issues which were coming out.
Thank you, Craig. Councillor Rook.
Thank you ever so much, Chair. When it comes to the public right-of-way, I can see from the photographs that the proposed 3-metre wide path is an improvement on what is currently there. But I don't think we should stop just there, as in putting tarmac down. Members have raised concerns about the tunnelling effects, and as has been addressed by Amy, that could be conditioned out. But if we're looking to enhance those walking routes, maybe we should be considering other things like adequate lighting through the along the Prow as well. Where it narrows as it passes, I think it's plot number 2. It may be beneficial to have some additional lighting included there to mitigate some of that closing down, of the area. So I would suggest that we also look at further enhancements of the public right-of-way that includes additional lighting, as well as possibly a buffer between the highway and the public right-of-way. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Rook. Councillor Callard.
Thank you, Chair. Mine's just a quick question. I didn't see it anywhere, so apologies if it's been covered, but do any of these proposed houses have solar panels, and do we know what technology they use to heat them?
Should I do Dale's questions first, and then I'll come directly to those. So in terms of, all the details of the public right-of-way will be conditioned, as you mentioned. In relation to lighting, there is a condition restricting lighting in relation to the dwellings, considering the potential habitat for bats and light spill. So we just have to make sure that we manage those 2 impacts whilst creating an appropriate, safe public right-of-way, but not harming any potential ecology. And if there is any ecology on the site, it is very much the northern portion. There's an area at the back of plot 1 and 2 that is separate specifically for a special ecological habitat up there. So we just need to be mindful of those 2 impacts. Secondly, in relation to the solar panels, no, there isn't any proposals for solar panels on the properties at the moment. Whilst the developer could put those on, that's absolutely fine. That would be great. We would be welcoming that. But as we've said in a number of other applications, it isn't a policy requirement at the moment. And again, in the revised RLDP, that is something we'll be looking at. But these properties will all have to be built in accordance with building regs and the standards coming through in that way. So there'll be an element of enhancement in terms of sustainable, more energy efficient buildings.
Okay, thanks for that. I got nobody else indicating they wish to speak. So, Councillor Cook, do you want to sum up briefly?
Yeah, I think it's quite clear and plain that we consider it to be overdeveloped. We consider a problem with number 9 to number 14. We consider safety issues for children and no demarcation lines between the PROW and the estate roads. And on that basis, I will take the decision to refuse this application.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cook. We have a recommendation for approval. Is anybody prepared to recommend approval? Councillor Butler, seconded. Can we have the voting function up for refuse then, please, Richard? I know that might take a second. Oh, you said you'd approve it. All right, okay. Sorry. In that case, don't alter it. Go for approval.
Is that with the additional condition?
With the additional condition.
Yeah.
Chair, could you repeat that additional condition, please?
Amy, can you do that?
Yeah, the additional condition is to consider to remove permitted development rights for plot 1 in relation to boundary treatments. So it's maintaining the screen wall and the low-level hooped fence, as we discussed, in order to protect that public right-of-way.
Okay, yeah, yes, approved, yeah.
Okay, members, that has been approved. Thanks everybody for that. We'll move on with the agenda. And Phil, you've got some decisions on appeals.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll just share my screen a moment just to run through these. So the first appeal was for a certificate of lawfulness. So that's to establish whether something can be done legally or in an authorised manner in planning terms without needing to apply afresh for planning permission. So in effect what this application was, as I said, a certificate of lawfulness to establish whether this bungalow could be occupied by a non-agricultural or forestry worker. And the bungalow has been empty since 2017. The inspector found that the wording of the original restrictive condition, occupancy condition, which sought to, went back to 1966 actually, there was a good year, which I won't go into as to why that was. You can probably guess, showing my age. He said it was flawed, the original condition. He said it was inconsistent and unenforceable. The condition appeared to intend the bungalow to be limited to accommodating a worker employed or last employed locally in agriculture or forestry and the dependents of such persons, and it was to be permanently attached to the existing small holding. But what the inspector said, as worded, the condition was not restrictive enough because it was worded that the proposal is permitted on the understanding that the bungalow will be occupied by. Well, it's a bit woolly, I'm afraid, the wording. We wouldn't use that sort of wording these days. What we'd say today is the occupancy of the dwelling shall be restricted to those, and it's more precise, it's more restrictive. So the inspector found the condition was too open and didn't restrict someone living in the bungalow who was not working in agriculture or forestry, and thus the inspector allowed the appeal. Having said that, I must admit we were a bit disappointed with the outcome because in the past we've had these sort of old aged conditions which were drafted at the time, without the benefit of subsequent case law, rulings, court rulings and government guidance as to how to draft precisely conditions. So we have had instances where inspectors have actually applied the modern occupancy condition to these sort of scenarios and replace the old condition with a modern, up-to-date condition which still maintains that the property is occupied by a farm worker or rural enterprise worker, or somebody last employed as a rural enterprise worker, or their dependents. So we've still maintained that stock of sort of lower cost housing for the generally lower salaried rural enterprise workers, which is obviously the intention of why the building was allowed in the open countryside in the first place. But unfortunately, I understand why the inspector's done this, but we think they've looked quite narrowly at this and have seen the flaw in the word in the condition, and haven't looked at the bigger picture of the intent behind the condition. So we didn't allow the certificate, but it's been, despite that, we refused the certificate because we said that he could impose the fresh, more modern wording of the condition, but the inspector didn't buy that, so we lost that one, I'm afraid. But what we would say is that we will continue our approach. We won't necessarily give up on these older conditions where we are confronted with either the removal of them or a certificate of lawfulness. We'll seek to see whether we can get the modern condition imposed, bearing in mind other inspectors have gone along with that approach. So hopefully that wasn't too long-winded and you understand what I mean by that. Are any questions on that one? Have I bamboozled you, have I? The other one, this was an interesting one. So this is New House Farm, Llangibby. It's grade 2 star listed, so it's very exceptional. It's an old farmhouse dating back to around 1700. It's been very little altered. The roof was replaced due to a fire, I think, but the bones of it and a lot of the interior have been very little altered, hence why it's grade 2 star listed rather than just grade 2 listed. Permission was granted to replace the roof lights there, but there was a condition seeking approval of the roof light treatment, the design of the roof lights, so that we could ensure that the design of them was to an appropriate standard. Unfortunately, the owner then put in these more, if you like, standardised roof lights, which do sit well above the plane of the roof and wouldn't be the type of roof lights we'd endorse really for this type of property. And so, Amy, do we serve a notice, or is it just he applied to retain the actual the roof light?
No, that's fine, yeah. They submitted an application for roof lights to the rear elevation of the property, so there weren't any there before, and that was approved, subject to a condition requiring details of those proposed roof lights. That was never submitted, and these roof lights were installed. It was considered that these are too chunky and have got too high a upstand, as Phil is saying, and therefore they applied to retrospectively retain these roof lights. However, the inspector agreed with us, or agreed with officers as we refused that application, and he considered those, I think there's a phrase in the decision that relates to them being chunky and creating clutter to the rear roof slope. So whilst we're not adverse to roof lights per se, it is these particular quite big, chunky, standard roof lights that the inspector endorsed our opinion, felt that they were inappropriate for the property. We'll be inviting an application for different types of roof lights to replace these.
Anything on item 6, Phil?
It's just for members' information, appeals. We'll try and do those once a quarter, really, so that they're a bit more regular. I think we left a little gap before reporting these ones.
Yeah. Okay, that's the end of the agenda. So, Anne.
Yes, just one thing. Am I dreaming, Phil, or did we at some stage get a Welsh Government inspector to come and talk to us? And I think we did at one stage. So perhaps that might be a good idea to think about on the agenda for some time in the future. Would that not be useful to new members?
Yeah, good idea. We'll see if we can organise that. That's a good thought. Okay, in that case, thank you everybody, and It was quite a long meeting, but not quite as long as I thought it was going to be, so thank you for that. We'll see you next time. Thanks very much.